Fired up. Good morning and welcome to this installment of Epic Insight. This is Chris Colangelo, Head of Marketing here at Epic, and I will be your host for today's session. As cash balance plans undergo a surge of growth, this is the perfect time to become more familiar with how they function and how to identify the clients and opportunities they benefit most. With that in mind, Tony Ornatek is joining us today to share an overview of cash balance plans, including how to position them, who should have them, and how to capitalize on the enormous potential they present. Tony is the Vice President and Consulting Actuary for Actuarial Designs Solutions, better known as ADS, a recent and exciting addition to the Epic family. Tony is an enrolled actuary with over 40 years of experience in the pension and insurance industry. Prior to his affiliation with ADS, he operated Teak Associates, specializing in all aspects of retirement plan and executive deferred compensation consulting services for not-for-profit healthcare organizations. Your line will be muted throughout today's presentation, but if you have any questions you would like Tony to address at the conclusion of the session, please feel free to enter them into the questions panel on the GoToWebinar pane on your screen. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tony. Tony, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, very much, and welcome everybody. I hope you find today's presentation useful as well as interesting. The several things we're going to cover today will be, first of all, we're going to take a little step backwards and generically talk about qualified plans and how useful they can be as a wealth management tool. And then we'll get into the topic of cash balance plans, why use one, how does the cash balance plan work, and then we'll talk about some examples, some real-life solutions that we've been able to effect in the past. And last but not least, we'll open up to questions at the very end. First of all, why use a tax-qualified plan? Well, as far as tax-deferred savings goes, in a tax-qualified retirement plan of some sort, there's both the short-term and the long-term benefits. In the short term, there's the obvious deductibility of which can reduce current taxes. And then to layer on top of that the long-term benefits of increased accumulations, tax-exempt growth. The assets in these plans grow tax-free, and it just adds to that geometric growth of compound interest. Another reason for using a tax-qualified plan to help grow assets for high-wealth individuals is also that there's a creditor protection that's involved with tax-qualified plans. Under the guise of ERISA, pension benefits are protected from outside liens and assignment of all those benefits, with the exception, certain exceptions with respect to spouses and, of course, the IRS. This is one feature that physicians and lawyers really cherish. You know, they're in very high-risk situations and are fairly open to a fair amount of liability, and the ability for them to protect these assets is very important, can be very important to them. Thirdly, as a tax-qualified plan, especially a defined benefit plan, which a cash balance plan happens to be, I'll talk about that in a minute, there's a certain guarantee of benefits that's provided by the PBGC. And PBGC stands for the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. This is a government insurance company that was created in 1976 when ERISA was passed, and operates much like the FDIC, but instead of insuring bank accounts and savings accounts, the PBGC insures benefits of participants in defined benefit and cash balance plans. Not all cash balance plans are eligible for PBGC coverage, but some of them are. And last but not least, which is sort of a I should say, a very overlooked feature of tax-qualified plans for these types of situations, is there's a contribution requirement. And when initially introduced as a contribution requirement, it tends to scare people a little bit, like, oh my God, I got to do this every year. But from an advisor's perspective, it's actually kind of a good thing because it promotes savings discipline. And when we design these programs, we make sure that the contribution requirement, whatever it might be, is appropriate and thoroughly allowable able to be met by the respective plan sponsor. I hear so many advisors say, yeah, I met with my client last week and we agreed to put in $50,000 into his brokerage account this year, but however, something came up and he decided to buy a boat instead, so he missed this year's contribution. That can't happen with a qualified plan, so because of the contribution requirement. So promoting savings discipline is another very important feature of these types of programs. Now let's talk a little about why adopt a cash balance plan. Well, as I mentioned before, a cash balance plan is a retirement plan. It's also considered to be a defined benefit plan. And it's a qualified plan with higher annual deductible limits. If we look at the maximum contribution amounts and deductible amounts that are available to defined contribution type programs, whether that be a profit sharing plan or a 401k plan, we see that the maximum annual deductible limit runs somewhere around $50,000. If you're under the age of 50, it's slightly below $50,000. If you're over 50, you get the advantage of a catch-up contribution, and so you can gain a little bit more leverage there. But that's pretty much it. Also, I want to point out that each of these limits, deductible limits, are annual limits. It's sort of a use it, lose it. If you don't take advantage of the deductible limit at any one particular point in time, you can't roll it forward and use it in a subsequent year. However, if we look and compare this deductible limit to that of a comparable cash balance plan, we see that the amount that can be contributed and deducted in any one year can be considerably and significantly higher than that of a defined contribution plan. Now, the examples I show here indicate a cash balance plan that would begin at these respective ages. The other nice thing about it, I mentioned that the defined contribution deductible limit is a use it or lose it. It's an annual limit. For cash balance plans and defined benefit plans, it's a lifetime limit that covers the period of time in which the plan is in effect. The maximum amount of limit that you can accrue must be accrued over 10 years. Anything short of 10 years is prorated. And so these limits show these contributions show the deductible amounts that will be available for plan sponsors had they begun the plans at their respective ages. So, for example, someone age 55 would be eligible to put in $125,000 over the next 10 years, and that could accumulate to quite a tidy sum. What is a cash balance plan? You're probably asking that question right now. Well, as I mentioned before, it's a qualified retirement plan. It is also a defined benefit plan. It follows all the same rules, but it looks, acts, and feels just like a defined contribution plan to both participants as well as the plan sponsor. There are individual accounts maintained for each participant, and they're basically notional accounts, hypothetical accounts that are kept as record-keeping accounts behind the scenes. Each year, those accounts are credited with an annual credit. It's very similar to a contribution you would make to a 401k plan every year. Every year, there's an annual interest credit that's provided to that plan. One thing to keep in mind is in cash balance plans, there is no individual investment direction that exists like in a 401k type plan for participants, with the exception of the obvious single employer plan where you've got a sole proprietor who obviously is the only participant in the plan, and he or she is probably directing those investments themselves. And last but not least, when it comes time to distribute the plan benefit, whether it be a termination of employment or retirement or for whatever reason, the plan benefit is the value of the participant's account at that point in time. So let's look at an example here as how one would work. And in the first year, the initial year of a cash balance plan, there's obviously no beginning balance for the participant. And being no initial balance over the course of the year, there's no interest credit as well. However, at the end of the year, the plan would make, for the sole, let's assume this is a sole proprietor, a one-life plan, the cash balance credit would be $100,000 for this person. And so the ending balance is $100,000 for that year. The ending balance of the first year becomes the beginning balance of the second year. If we assume a 5% rate of return on the account, the interest credit for the second year is $5,000. And then at the end of the second year, the cash balance credit will be added of another $100,000. So the balance at the end of the second year in this particular example would be $205,000. I hope you begin to see the tremendous potential for equity growth in these programs, being able to put in so much money at one time. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the interest crediting to the cash balance accounts. In last November of 2015, the IRS published final regulations with respect to what they call a market rate of return that's available as a safe harbor for cash balance plans. And they had three different methods of choosing or crediting interest. And a cash balance plan would choose one of these three to do that. First of all, there's a fixed percent or a bond type index. The fixed percentage would be, and it would be actually hard written and wired right into the plan document. This plan would credit the participant accounts with the 4%, 5%, or as much as 6% of interest per year to their accounts. Or you could choose a bond type index. You could choose a 1-year treasury, a 5-year treasury, 10-year treasury, 30-year treasury, or some other government related index as the interest credit that would be credited to the participant's accounts each year. Alternatively, the IRS also allows a mirror of a registered investment company, mutual fund, or a RIC to be used under the caveat that the RIC must maintain the same characteristics as a general market. So you could use something like a balanced fund, for example, as the benchmark for the return that participant accounts would earn. You couldn't use something like oil futures mutual fund to do that because it's not consistent with the general market type of thing. And last but not least, you could also use the plan's actual portfolio return as crediting to credit interest to these accounts. So you basically was looking at something that would look very similar to a defined contribution plan. Now, that being said, there are certain design criteria that tend to limit your choices of the interest crediting process. And essentially, the biggest one is the predictability. Predictability is very important in these programs because we're actually shooting for a target amount that, which it represents the maximum benefit that could be extracted by this program for the principal or the sole proprietor. Going over that limit, there's negative consequences. So we want to make sure that the contributions, along with the interest that's earned on those contributions, can predictably achieve the goal of hitting that target at the end of the plan's life. We have found typically that the interest credit of 4 or 5% is ideal because that 4 or 5% can be translated into an asset return that is fairly reachable every year and fairly predictable by the investment advisor. And last but not least, I understand that NBT is investigating the development of a collective trust that could be used for this purpose that would give us a reasonable rate of return that would fit with the program and would not affect the predictability much at all, if at all. So let's talk a little bit now about what happens on retirement. At retirement, typically it will be age 65, but it's not uncommon for us to design a plan down with a normal retirement age of 62. I'm going to talk about that for a second. I mentioned that the maximum benefit limit is measured as of the normal retirement age, or as of age 65, let's say. And being a defined benefit plan, that maximum benefit limit is reduced for early commencement of benefits if the benefit commences earlier than 65. However, there is no reduction between age 62 and 65. So we can design a plan at age 62 that actually allows the principal to accumulate a little higher number, a little better number over a little shorter period of time, which is very advantageous and oftentimes more desirable. But in this example, I'm assuming this normal retirement age is age 65, and let's say by age 65 the principal, the sole proprietor, has accumulated $2.7 million in their account. They've been putting money in for the last 10 years, and the money's been earning 5% per year both as an asset, actual asset return, as well as a portfolio, or I should say, a account return for the participant. And we've accumulated $2.7 million. Well, what do you do with it when you reach age 65? Well, there's one of two things you can do with it, and you're going to probably want to do with it, because beyond age 65, that maximum benefit begins to start to decrease, and so we don't want that maximum benefit going south of the amount of money that's in the plan's portfolio. So we would recommend that at age 65, the plan be terminated and the $2.7 million either rolled out on a tax-deferred basis to an individual retirement account, or rolled out again on a tax-deferred basis to a 401k plan account that the participant may have. The advantage of this is at this point in time, since the participant has met their maximum benefit limit under the defined benefit or cash balance plan, there's no more requirement with respect to a ceiling on that benefit, and they're free to invest anything they would like to into those individual retirement accounts or 401k plans that make sense. So the tax deferral of the $2.7 million can continue in those successor programs, either the IRA or the 401k plan. Now let's talk about a few examples that we've been involved with. The first one of which was, I think, really interesting. We have an owner of a company with family members and employees both. It's not just a sole proprietor. And the owner and his spouse happen to each be 58 years old, and their son is age 36 and has just begun to be heavily involved in the management of the business. And so they've also have 15 employees. In this particular business, these are long-term professionals, so the transiency and the attrition rate of the employees is very small. So the objective of the family is to maximize their tax-deductible contributions for both the owner and the family, whether that be their son or any other family member that might join at some point in time. At the same time, they would like to minimize the employee cost, which is this scenario for the plan objectives is very typical in these types of programs. This chart's rather busy, so I'm going to explain it first by going across the columns to explain what each column is. The first column shows the amount of cash balance credits that we are crediting each person's account in the first year. We also, and it's very common for us to partner the cash balance accounts or cash balance plan with a 401k and profit sharing plan. And we utilize oftentimes the 401k profit sharing plans as leverage to help us maintain significant leverage in the cash balance accounts. So the second column shows the contribution that would go into the 401k safe harbor non-elective account for each of the participants. And there's also a profit sharing element to that plan as well. The fourth column over shows the cash balance credits and the defined contribution plan contributions as one whole amount to show how much money is actually being set aside on a tax-deferred basis for everyone. Obviously, in a 401k plan, in addition to the safe harbor non-elective and profit sharing, there are also employee elected deferrals. Then finally, we show in the last column the total contributions, including deferrals, for all parties involved. Now, what's interesting is we can see that, go back to the first column, the cash balance account credits, they total $157,000, which includes the credits for both dad and mom. However, dad's credit is actually $155,000 because he's obviously got the largest salary. We included mom as an employee with a nominal salary, but her contribution to the cash balance plan is only $2,000, as is everyone else's, including Junior and the other employees. The 15 employees are each getting $2,000 each for a total of $30,000. In this scenario, we see that the dad, mom, and Junior are receiving 84% of the total credits that are going into the cash balance plan, which is a decent leverage. Now, as I mentioned before, we partnered the cash balance plan with the 401k profit sharing plan in order for us to make the non-discrimination regulations satisfied. And we see that the contributions for the family and the 401k safe harbor non-elective, everyone gets 3% of pay right across the board. We then use the profit sharing element to perform our compliance magic and make sure that the whole thing fits and fits into the regulations. And we see that the family receives $62,000 in profit sharing money, while the other 15 employees receive $14,000. And so we see that the leverage, when we get over to the total cash balance credits and defined contribution plan contributions, the yellow column, we see that the leverage for the family is 78% of the total contributions that are going into retirement programs, whether it be the cash balance plan, the safe harbor 401k, or the profit sharing. As I mentioned before, there's obviously not elective deferrals that are made to the 401k plan. In this case, we would max out as best we can because of the safe harbor feature. We would max out the family into their salary deferrals of $66,000. This particular example happened to turn out to produce $35,000 of elective salary deferrals for the employees, so that in total, the family is putting away $303,000 in the far right column towards this retirement plan, whether it be company-sponsored contributions or their salary deferrals. And the total amount going in for the employees is $102,000. So we see that the family is actually leveraging 75% of the total contribution into their accounts. It's a little like apples and oranges, however, insofar as the $303,000 that the family is actually enjoying as a tax deferral are decisions that they make, whether they're corporate or personal. And if we look at if we go over to the yellow column under the other employees, the $66,126, that's the amount that the family has decided to contribute to the other employees, regardless of their personal elections. So that's their money that's going into that plan. So those are the two numbers we really want to compare. If we look at the next slide, we see that that $303,000 actually saves, because of the tax deferral nature of it, it saves the family $121,000 in tax. Now, granted, they had to come up with $66,000 to finance the contributions to the program for the employees, but that's still paying employees versus paying Uncle Sam, number one. And number two, it leaves over another $55,000 that they saved on a tax deduction, as a tax deduction. And not only did they save the $55,000 this year, but that's going to grow at 5% per year. It could turn into $36,000 over 10 years, an additional $36,000 over 10 years. So you can see the power and the strength of these types of programs, and focusing on not only tax deferring as a deduction, but also tax deferring the return on that deduction as well. Not to mention the deferral on the actual principal that goes in. And I've got a second example for you. This was obviously a fairly common example where we have a family business, but we also have partnerships. And this particular partnership was a medical practice. We had 4 doctors. They were all equal partners. We had substantial incomes. All their incomes were in excess of the maximum compensation that we could take into consideration. And these 4 doctors had 2 staff members, and these are 2 physician assistants. They were making a pretty good dollar. When they came to us, they had a 20% profit sharing plan where everybody got 20%. The doctors got 20%. The staff members got 20%. Some of the doctors were not necessarily satisfied with the amount of money they could put in their profit sharing plan. So their objective was to increase their contributions. However, they wanted to vary their partner contributions based on their needs. And so we designed a program that before when they first came to us, each of the partners collectively were being able to put away $208,000 into their profit sharing plan, and their employees were putting an additional $54,000 in for their 2 employees, for a total of $262,000. Owners obviously got 79% of that total. Now, keep in mind that each of the partners were putting in exactly the same amount, and one of the criteria was to see if they could vary that amount that they put in. Each had different needs. Of these 4 partners, there was a fairly wide age difference between the 4 partners, and the younger partners actually were getting established in a medical practice. I think the youngest one had actually just purchased a house, and so he had a mortgage to pay. They had young children, and so on and so forth. We had the oldest doctor who was already beyond nearing retirement, and he was already beyond the fact where his mortgage was paid off. His kids were out of school, and he could afford to put away as much as he could towards his retirement. He was a late, let's call him a late saver. And the other two, for various reasons, whether it be alimony or college tuition, didn't feel that they could put away quite as much money. So we came up with a program in which we were able to put away a total of $442,000 for all four doctors. And if we look at the cash balance plan on the far right, we see that we varied those contributions to the cash balance plan by doctor. The oldest doctor was putting in $120,000. The two other doctors that I mentioned had other personal expenses, only wanted to put in $90,000, and the youngest of the doctors decided, I'm going to put in $80,000, dip my toe in the water, and actually because of his age, that was the most we could get for him at a reasonable level. So the total going into the cash balance plan for these four guys was $380,000. By the way, there was nothing going into the cash balance for the employees. However, as I mentioned in the earlier example, we utilized a 401k and a profit sharing plan to help us meet the non-discrimination requirements of these programs. And so by implementing a partner 401k profit sharing plan, we were able to put an additional $62,000 into that plan for the doctors, as well as another $62,000 for the employees, for a total of $125,000. When added to the $380,000, we see that the total contribution, both of the retirement programs, cash balance plan, as well as the 401k profit sharing plan, came out to $500,000. And so now the owners were enjoying not only more money going into their accounts on a tax-deferred basis, but also owning a larger share of that as well. If we compare the before and after, before the partners were able to put away $208,000, now they're putting away $442,000. We increased their savability by a tax-deferred amount of almost $235,000, and it only cost them $8,500 for the employees, for a total of $243,000. That saved them. Not only were they able to put away an additional $234,000 on a tax-deferred basis, but they were also, because of the deductibility of that amount, were able to save themselves $97,000 in taxes. Obviously, $8,500 of that went to the employees. So their objectives were to increase the partner contributions and vary it by partner needs. And our cash balance solution, I think, met those criteria. We allowed them the opportunity to maximize their contributions and then accommodate both the savers and the spenders in their group. Now, just to recap what we've talked about today, starting out with qualified plans are a great way to accelerate net asset growth on a tax-deferred basis. Obviously, I think I've shown you that cash balance plans can defer more for individuals than a defined contribution plan can by itself. A very important feature, as I mentioned, especially to attorneys and physicians, is cash balance assets are protected from creditors. And for all the investment advisors, the contribution to commitment for cash balance plan also encourages disciplined savings. If the PBGC is involved, cash balance plan benefits can provide a lot of security for the participants to ensure that whatever benefit is being accrued or accumulated for them will be there when the time comes to distribute that money. And last but not least, the cash balance has the flexibility to meet client objectives. And we've seen that it can maximize the tax deferral for principals, whether they're sole proprietors or small business owners. It maximizes the state accumulation through the tax deferral accumulation of these accounts. It's possible to vary benefits by principal. There's an old wives' tale that says everyone is locked into the same amount. That's not necessarily true. There's no hard rule of thumb to use. Each one of these is based on facts and circumstances, but we found that it's very possible to to accommodate these benefits by principal. And as I showed you a couple of examples, there's also an opportunity to use the cash balance plan as a pre-tax way to fund corporate or partnership buyouts. Now, I've talked about these plans in terms of protecting wealth and also accumulating an estate for high-income earners and high-wealth individuals. Cash balance plans also, by the way, can be used in many situations to improve the performance and reduce the volatility in what we would call traditional pension plans for larger corporations as well. Companies with over 100 employees, 200 employees. A traditional pension plan has, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, caused a lot of angst with respect to its volatility and its runaway costs. Cash balance plans, we found, can help to mitigate some of those things as well. So there's a lot of different ways of using cash balance plans, not simply for high wealth individuals. Why do a cash balance plan with ADS? Well, that's what we do. It's our core competency. We're a group of actuaries with a significant amount of experience. We are very tuned in to your client's specific objectives and needs. And I think most important of all, we help keep the plan on track to achieve your client's goals. Cash balance plans, whether they're designed for a sole proprietor, small business, or a large corporate entity, are not set it and forget it situations. They need to be monitored on a regular basis. There needs to be an open dialogue between the actuary and the plan sponsor to make sure that the goals are met and the goals are achieved. Bad things can happen if this is not closely adhered to in a number of different ways, either not having enough money to pay the benefits or having too much money that excise taxes may be imposed at some later date. With respect to implementing these programs, as I mentioned before, we've got an experienced actuarial consulting staff. Between our actuaries on staff, we have well over 120 years experience in these things. As I mentioned before, we keep track of your client's goals and objectives by monitoring these plans. So we give each plan personalized and customized attention. Our real concern is to avoid any future funding or compliance surprises that might otherwise surface if not maintained and monitored on a regular basis. Now, in order to get one of these cash balance plans up and running, what's necessary? Well, the first thing is to complete what we call our information request form, an IRF. This asks questions about the owner, the owner's shares, how many owners there are the owners employed or are they non-employees? Questions about the nature of the corporate entity itself. Is it a sole proprietor? Is it an S Corp or C Corp? Is it a LLC? Whatever. And this information helps us to understand the nature of the reason for implementing this type of a plan. The request form also includes a census for all employees, not just the highly compensated employees or the sole proprietors. We find that compensation history for the favored employees, whether that be the sole proprietor or just the owner or other highly compensated employees that may not be related to the employer, we find it very helpful if we have compensation history for these individuals. At least three prior years. 5 is better. And the reason for this is that we can sometimes use that prior history, that prior service, to help us more appropriately design the contribution levels for the employees and participants. And that compensation history is depending upon whether it's a corporate entity that issues W-2s or whether it's a partnership with a K-1 or a Schedule C, whatever it might be. That information is important to us. If there is another plan that's already in place for the entity, whether it be a 401k or a SEP or a simple 401k, it's important for us to see a copy of the plan document. because if we're going to utilize the 401k plan, for example, as part of the overall program to help us leverage the compliance issues to leverage the contributions towards the owners and highly compensated employees, it needs the two plans need to work in concert with each other and have some provisions that are very similar. And so for us to be able to see the plan document of the other plan is very important to know what changes, if any, need to be made to that plan, or how to design the plan that we're designing for the cash balance plan we're designing for the corporate entity. And last but not least, and this is a question that's on the information request form, we need to have information on any of the companies that are owned by owners of the company that will be sponsoring the cash balance plan. There are control group issues that come into play here, not nowhere near insurmountable, but things we need to know about up front so that we can do our best to make sure that we can design this program that meets the needs of the sole proprietor or partner or owner, and provides a benefit that's consistent with their strategy, the retirement strategy. So I've come to the end of the presentation itself. And Brian, I'm sorry, Chris, are there any questions out there for us?
Sure, Tony. That does conclude the presentation portion of today's session, but we do have a couple of questions from the group. First is, would a reasonable investment include a portfolio with a 60-40 equity fixed income mix or something more conservative?
I would say a 60-40 it would be appropriate. However, it should be 60 fixed and 40 equity. You know, even with a totally fixed portfolio, it's always good to have a little bit of an equity hedge in there. I think 40% is probably a ceiling for that hedge. I think an 80-20% mix is really a good way to approach this. What we do oftentimes with advisors is the client already has a relationship typically with the investment advisor, and as part of their personal portfolio, they obviously have some kind of a reasonable asset allocation with that investment advisor. And when we implement cash balance plans, again, oftentimes for a sole proprietor, the cash balance plan's portfolio becomes the fixed asset allocation of that particular person's overall asset allocation with the advisor. And so what it does also then frees up whatever they've already got there for a fixed allocation to be used elsewhere to take advantage of other opportunities in the equity market.
Okay. The second question references the medical practice example. They're curious as to why would the employees not be covered in the cash balance plan?
Well, it was in this particular example, it was the desire of the doctors to minimize the amount of additional contributions going to the employees. And so, as long as we didn't have to include the non-owners in the cash balance plan, it was just administratively and regulatorily easier to do that and to put their benefit into the profit sharing plan, where they could invest in whatever investments were available to them in that 401k profit sharing plan, and they could manage their investments themselves, which employees probably found more advantageous anyway.